Welcome to our second successful Sappy hour. This is just kind of a casual happy hour, but with kind of an Atlas twist of the yellow-bellied sapsucker, where we're going to be presenting to you all on a particular topic to do with the Atlas, in this case, the very exciting topic of owl surveys. And then after that's done, we're going to take all of your questions about both owl surveys, but everything else that's Atlas related as well that you've always wanted to know, but didn't know where and when and who to ask. We're doing things a little bit differently tonight, so I just do want to point that out. Some of you are joining us, 100 of you are joining us on Zoom tonight, which is very exciting. And so if you do want to ask a question at any point during tonight on Zoom, you can do so in one way. So you'll notice if you kind of hover over the bottom of your screen on Zoom, you'll see that there's just a toolbar of various functions. Please do use the Q&A rather than the chat function, if you possibly can, to ask your questions for the panelists, who I'll introduce in a second. And then you also have the great option of seeing what questions other people have asked and maybe upvoting them if it's something that you also wanted to know, and then you don't have to type in the question again. So that's great. And yeah, and if you actually are joining us on Facebook, I see that we have a successful stream to Facebook tonight as well, which is great. You can also just put your question into the Facebook comments chat as well. So we're going to be taking questions from all over the internet. It's the future. So yeah, thanks for coming, and thanks for joining us again after our kind of, Sappy hour fail on Thursday. The internet is fickle, and we had done something to anger it on Thursday night, but we're really happy that you kind of, been patient and joined us again. Okay, so who do we have talking about owl surveys tonight? Well, I already introduced them at length on Thursday, right before we kind of cut everything, so I'll be pretty brief with this before we get started. But we have Mike Cadman. Mike, and you can give a wave as well. Mike will be doing the bulk of the presentation for you guys this evening. He'll be talking about Screech-owl surveys in particular, but also answering all of your Atlas questions in general. Mike handles basically everything to do with the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, so we're in pretty good hands tonight. Mike, you want to say hi?
Yep. Hello, everybody. You'll be hearing from me lots, so
okay.
On this, other folks.
Okay, yeah, you'll be hearing from Mike a lot. We also have, if you came to the last Sappy hour, you already know Mike Burrell because he presented on what was new for the third Atlas compared to the second Atlas. And he's here just to kind of answer any questions that we may have, non-owl related questions, just kind of, I think, about, atlasing in general. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, any that we think that I'm a good person to answer the questions for.
I feel like a lot of app questions are coming Mike's way, and I think he expects it, so that's good. And then we have two other owl experts in particular. If you've done any sort of owl surveys for Birds Canada, or actually any volunteer surveys for Birds Canada at any point over the last 20 years, you already are very familiar with Kathy Jones, who's been running the Central Ontario. And actually, well, Kathy, why don't you say what you've been doing with owls and what you'll be talking about tonight?
I've been looking after the Ontario Nocturnal Owl Surveys, which run in Central and Northern Ontario for over a decade now. I've been working on all volunteer management for Ontario programs with Birds Canada for a couple decades. So I'm quite happy to be here to help out tonight.
Yeah, so she'll answer all questions that aren't Screech-owl related and hawk-owl related, because we also have Kevin Hanna here. He's with the Canadian Wildlife Service. He works on a bunch of Atlas committees, and he'll be talking a lot about the hawk-owl surveys, which are happening basically right now. Is that right, Kevin?
Pretty much. Let's hope. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so we're going to turn it over to Mike Cadman to kind of get us started with a presentation. And yeah, if a question, Mike, you can kind of start your screen share now, if you like. And yeah, if any question occurs to you and you want to kind of save your play with your question about in general or in particular, please go ahead.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for coming out tonight and listening to this. We're going to be talking, I'm going to be talking for the next little while about the Ontario Screech-owl survey, and then Kevin about the hawk-owl and Kathy about the other owl surveys. And we're doing it in this order, and most of the time we'll go to the Screech-owl survey because the other surveys are modeled on the Screech-owl. The whole format of it has basically been used for the other surveys. So once you understand the Screech-owl, it should be pretty easy to trade over to the others. And got our email address here and website information in case you want to contact us with any questions after tonight. So this is the map from Atlas 2 of this eastern screech-owl, and that map we would hopefully reproduce this time, whether or not we do any standardized owl surveys. This is all about breeding evidence. The different levels of breeding evidence here are shown in different colors, and you can see the pattern of distribution of the bird across southern Ontario during Atlas 2, with possible, probable, and confirmed breeding there. Yellow dots showing new squares where the birds arrived, and black dots showing squares where it didn't appear in Atlas 2, but it was found in Atlas 1. So you can do that. I encourage you to go out and do owl survey, owl work in any of your squares at any time, and build up our information on the distribution of the screech-owl. What tonight's presentation is mostly about, though, is essentially, it's almost like doing point counts for owls. And the design of the Eastern Screech-owl survey is intended to give us a map of the relative abundance of the screech-owl, to show the pattern of where it's most common across the province. So this is the map from Atlas 2. We designed an Atlas survey for Eastern Screech-owl in Atlas 2. Lots of people got involved. All of the black and white dots here are squares where people did standardized surveys last time, and then the results here are smoothed out to give you the pattern of occurrence of the relative abundance of the bird across southern Ontario. So you can see down in the southwest, people are getting 5 to 10 screech-owls on most of their points. In most squares down in those red areas, and it drops off until up in Eastern Ontario, you're getting probably one or less than one per survey. So we'd like to duplicate this work, get more surveys done, and see if we can fill in the current distribution of the bird. So in order to participate in this, you need to find the materials. So if you go onto the website, onto special surveys, click on there, it opens up a couple of options. At this point, the owls, nightjars, the marsh bird work, the protocol is still being developed for that, but we should have it up in a month or so. And so then if you click on the owls and nightjars, things start opening up for you. You get onto the owl nightjar page. On the right, there's some training resources there, just so you can refresh yourself on the different owls and some of the other species that you're likely to hear in a nocturnal situation. The left side, though, is where the information is about the survey. So you can see you can click on the ESO instructions and forms here. That will open up both the data, both of the instruction manual and the form. So the instruction manual looks like this. It's on the website. We would encourage everybody, obviously, who's going to go out and do these surveys to get in there and read the manual and ask us any questions before heading out, or work with your regional coordinator. And you can also download the data form from that same spot. And so I'll go into more details about the data form a little bit later, but you can get it right from the website there. And for this, we're back to the old days where you have to fill in a paper form in the field and then enter the data later into the computer. So if you can memorize this map, the green area there is where we want to focus the Eastern Screech-owl surveys. I should mention too, there are some records up around Sault Ste. Marie, so we'd like to get some surveys done up there. And there are screech-owls in Manitoba and a few in Minnesota that make us think it's worthwhile trying some screech-owl surveys up around Rainy River, Lake of the Woods area. So if you are up there, we'd encourage you to try some screech-owl surveys up there as well. The other guys will talk more about the more northerly surveys. So when you open up the manual, you go immediately to a quick guide, which gives you a quick overview of the project. So really, it says anybody can do a screech-owl survey. You don't have to be expert as long as you know a couple of the basic calls. The survey takes place in March and April at night. It takes 2 to 3 hours to do it. There's 10 stations that you're going to be surveying for 7 minutes each. You've seen the area that will do it in the province. We do encourage you very much to contact your regional coordinator and line this up with your coordinator to make sure that we're not getting duplication, and everybody is happy about who's covering which square for the Screech-owl survey. I'll go into this, but as I said, there's 10 points and I'll show you where those are. But important considerations are you have to make sure the weather conditions are right, and that is going out on a relatively calm night. Wind should be less than 19 kilometers an hour, and temperatures above -15. So one of the nice things about starting the survey a little late this year is that we probably won't be running into too many of those cold temperatures. And you need some pretty good equipment to play that can play audio files, MP3 format files, quite loud without distorting the songs very much. It's important that you keep safety in mind for this. You are going to be out at night. You are going to be on roadside, so wear some highly visible clothing. Okay, so if you haven't yet seen them, these are the new 10 by 10 kilometer square maps on the Atlas website. There's a map for every square in what we call Southern Ontario, about 2,000 of those. And we're in the process of just finishing up the maps for the north, but the southern ones are available now. So in running this Eastern Screech-owl survey, your goal is to look at point number 1 and determine from this map if you think it's going to be a suitable point for a Screech-owl survey. And if it is, include that in your survey. And then you look at point number 2, point number 3, and you just keep looking at them until you've found 10 locations that are suitable. Now, suitable means it's a safe place. You can park on the side of the road safely. You want a spot that's not on a very busy road, because that would be distracting and noisy and difficult to hear the owls. And you have to be at least within 100 meters of suitable habitat, and you have to be more than a kilometer from any of your other Screech-owl survey locations. But you also have to be in and around then suitable habitat. And suitable habitat for Screech-owls is basically clusters of large mature trees. And as it says here, you find them in woodlands, groves, orchards, cemeteries, all those kind of places. And basically the byword is, if there's more than a few mature trees, you can consider that site to be suitable habitat for the Screech-owl. So I've gone through and I've looked at, this is my square near Guelph, and I've marked 10 locations that look suitable for the owl. I'm going to go out and I'm going to check these on the ground just to make sure, because you can't always tell until you get there. But you see, I had to go as high as point number 22 here before I found 10 that were adjacent to wooded areas or that looked good for Screech-owl. So I've got my 10 locations. And I should also mention, you can look at the locations on the newly available point counts, which are on the Atlas website now. So you can download those points onto your phone, take them with you on a map, and use that to navigate to your points. I'm not going to go into details on that now, but there is information on the website on how you can do that. And so equipment, there's kind of a long list here. You need to look at that carefully, check off, make sure you've got everything with you when you go out. The important things are the map to get you to the right location. You need certainly something to keep time, because time is very important for the survey. You're going to need a headlamp. You certainly need an MP3 player, and yeah, the other stuff you see here. So if you go back to the website, then in order to do the survey, you need the playback MP3. And so you go on to the same spot, click on that, takes you here, just click on here, and you can download that MP3. And then you're ready to head out and actually go to your point, set up, and start the survey. So to do that, you're going to employ the playback, and it is about 7 minutes. In fact, it's exactly 7 minutes long. So you're going to get out, get ready to play the playback. Put your player on the roof of your vehicle, and usually on a towel or something, so that you don't get too much reverberation off the roof of the vehicle. And then you can move away a little while. Press the play button and move away, so you're not listening to the car cooling down. And then the playback is going to last for 7 minutes. So it'll give you a double beep at the beginning. It'll play 2 minutes of silence with a beep in the middle to tell you 1 minute has gone. And then you go into 5 minutes of actual playback of calls, where each 1 minute, each of those 5 minute five 1 minute sections consists of 30 seconds of Screech-owl calls and 30 seconds of silence. So just by counting them as you go through, you'll know exactly which minute you're in, and that's going to be important because you have to record the data by minute as the recording progresses. Okay, so you can do all surveys on one night. We encourage you to do that. It takes, as I said, 2-3 hours to do it. But if something goes wrong or it doesn't work out for you that night, it's quite feasible to do spread it out over 2 evenings or more if it's necessary. But if you are going to do that, you'll have to start a separate Screech-owl survey form for each of the nights that you go out. We'll say it is very important. If you go out and you do 10 stations and you don't get any owls, we very much want that data. Don't not enter the information because you didn't get any owls. And certainly you'll go to spots where you're not going to get any owls. And within the survey, we need to get that information as well as to which sites actually had and didn't have birds and how many on each. So this is the data form that you'll be able to download and print. And I'll just sort of run through it briefly here in terms of the main parts. It looks like quite a lot at the beginning, but a lot of it's just explanation. You just have to provide us with your square ID, your name, if you've got somebody with you, what day you're doing the survey, and then any comments you'd have about it. We do ask that you do a broadcast test. So you play your playback, and somewhere along your route, you test to see how far you can hear that broadcast when it's blasting away. Can you hear it at 100 meters, 250 or 500? And that's helpful for us in calibrating your results. As you can see there, there's the list of the 4-letter codes for the birds you might get on the survey. And then you have noise codes and breeding codes. So basically, if it's noisier, you put a larger number. And then the breeding codes are the standard Atlas breeding codes. So to show you what a form looks like filled out, I get right down into the meat of the table here. You can see that I went out on, or I said I went out to looking at station 16. You don't have to do the point locations in any order, as long as you've got the lowest 10 numbers that had suitable habitat. And then you just record the time that you started, and then any birds that you got using the 4-letter codes. And then you just put an X to indicate which of the 1 minute periods you heard the bird in, either during the silent listening or during the 5-minute period. Or if you happen to hear one when you're packing up to leave, you can add it into the after the ESO broadcast section. If you could then, or you should then, enter a breeding code as to what breeding evidence you got. And then for each bird, you record the direction and the distance at which you first heard the bird. So in this case, the first one there was what was seen to the north of where I was standing, and was 50 to 100 meters away. And then you would just record the traffic count, how many cars went by, and what sort of noise level that involved. So you just do that for each station. And you can see you're likely in Southern Ontario to get the odd great horned owl mixed in, and record the same information for them. Back of the form looks like this, so you can complete all 10 surveys. Each single bird gets a single line on here. So you can see in point number 1 there down near the bottom, I got Screech-owls in, I got 2 Screech-owls, and each one of those I indicate which minutes I heard it in, and again, the direction, the breeding code, and the distance to it. At the very bottom of the form, you can see there's information, so you can record information on anything else that you heard. So on point 4, I heard a woodcock, so I heard 1 woodcock, and the breeding evidence is S for a singing bird, and so I can record that on here. Not expecting you'll hear a lot at night, but it's handy to have that available. Okay, so that's the outline of the Screech-owl survey. I'm going to hand things over to Kevin now, and he's going to fill you in on how the hawk owl differs from the Screech-owl survey.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Mike, maybe you can give me a thumbs up if it's good.
Yeah, if you can
All
see
right.
me.
Excellent. Okay, so again, my name's Kevin Hanna. I'm a biologist with the Canadian Wildlife Service, and I'm based in Ottawa. I obviously sit on the OWL working group for the Atlas, and I drafted the protocol for the Northern Hawk Owl survey. So primarily the survey is quite similar to the Eastern Screech-owl survey, and it's similar to most of the other surveys like Mike described. So I'll just spend a few minutes sort of outlining some of the major differences with this survey versus some of the other ones. So I guess the first most obvious thing is it's a new survey for the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas. It hasn't been run in previous atlases. And actually, this is probably the first time anywhere in the world that there's a dedicated Northern Hawk Owl survey. So pretty interesting and exciting, I guess. So Northern Hawk Owls are pretty uncommon species within their range. Michael maybe show, I think he did earlier, a map that this survey is really constrained to the northern part of the province. They really only occur there during the breeding season. So it's only worth running the survey in that part of the province. So hawk owls really aren't covered by any other monitoring program out there. The Atlas really might be the only tool we can use for collecting additional information on this species. So I think it's kind of an important addition this year to include it, or this time around. Hawk owls are fairly early breeders. So now is the time to be out there if you can, if you're in that part of the world, and you can find good habitat to get into. March 1st to May 31st is the date window for surveying the species. So again, I mentioned it's a fairly early breeder. That's why we're running the survey so early relative to other species. But the breeding habitat can be a bit difficult to access. And that's probably one of the reasons why it's not surveyed well by other monitoring programs at the moment. The skill level for this survey is easy, and I'd say it's probably even easier than the Eastern Screech-owl survey. You really only have one species you're dedicated to survey. That's the Northern Hawk Owl. And in contrast to most of the owl surveys, Northern Hawk Owls are diurnally active. So that means they're active during the day. So you don't have to be out driving around on these remote roads at night. So that's one certain safety benefit that isn't true for some of the other surveys. I guess for this species, given that it's a playback survey, experience that I've had with it is that when you play the playback protocol and you go through the protocol sequence, the species responds, it's quite responsive when it does call back. And there's a good chance you'll see it. It'll fly right towards you or near you and land and call. So you don't necessarily have to know the calls of this species to be able to run this survey, because the owls will come to you. What else was I going to say? Yeah, so the duration of the survey is a little shorter than the Screech-owl survey. The Screech-owl survey is a 7-minute survey, so that's how long you have to spend at each station. With this hawk owl survey, it's only 4 minutes. There's 2 1-minute silent listening periods, and then the 3rd minute is all playback. So it's an entire minute of alternating types of calls that this species gives. And then there's another single minute of passive listening after that. So it's a 4-minute survey at each point. When you do 10 points, I estimate even with driving time, it'd probably take between 2 to 3 hours to complete. Again, sometime between sunrise and sunset. So it's a daytime survey again. The one unique thing about this species that might take a bit of time when you've identified an atlas square you feel like you want to survey is it uses fairly specific habitat. So open muskeg, areas that have been recently forested, so forest harvest areas, cut blocks, they're all pretty good habitats. I found that recently burned forests, specifically those that are 10 years post-fire or less, are really good habitats for this species. Again, it's not common anywhere within its range, and I'd expect that even on a good survey, so 10 points in a square, you might get 1. I wouldn't expect any more than that. And if you do, that's a really great result. So that's about it for the specifics, I guess, or how the hawk owl survey is unique to the other surveys, and certainly welcome any questions that people might have and try and answer them towards the end of the call. So thanks.
Great, Kathy. Can we hand things off to you?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry, I've just got to go out of my, find your slides here. Okay.
Hi, everyone. It's Kathy Jones again, and I'm with the Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey, and I had the privilege to help develop the protocols for the barred owl, northern saw-whet owl in central Ontario, and relatively familiar with the northern protocol, that is great gray owl and boreal owl. So I just wanted to go over a little bit about how they differ from the eastern screech-owl protocol that Mike told you about earlier. Pretty much they work on the same standard system. So much of what Mike has told you is the same thing. Ideally, whichever protocol you decide to work, you're going to want to pull out the specific protocol for that area and read it to make sure that you understand the differences between. But the two protocols I'm talking about happen in central Ontario, and that's the gray stripes on this map, and that's barred owl and northern saw-whet owl. And the blue at the top, basically overall the road-based areas is blue at the top, and that's going to be great gray owl and boreal owl survey. A couple points I wanted to make was, first, if you have done an Ontario Nocturnal Owl survey, when you open these protocols, they're going to seem incredibly familiar. So the technique is pretty much the same. It's the locations that you do the survey that differ. If you collect Ontario Nocturnal Owl survey data, that's terrific. That data can be integrated into the atlas at a later date when Mike needs it, so that your data will end up in the atlas if you do an owl survey. We ask that you collect your data the normal way for the Ontario Owl survey, and we'll make sure it gets transferred over. The other question I commonly get asked, and I'm going to discuss it while we have this map up, is we all know that there's barred owls north of the 47th degree latitude line, and we all know that there's barred owls south of the gray area. But are there enough data points within those areas to get 10 of those sampling points with appropriate habitat to do the standard survey? And if you think you are, have a conversation with your regional coordinator and see about doing the survey in those areas. But if you don't have 10 points, consider other options for collecting data on barred owls in those other areas. Mike, could I have the next slide? So here is basically the main differences between the central barred owl protocol and the northern gray owl protocol. All of these protocols start with 2 minutes of silence. The barred owl is quite long, and it follows 2 minutes of silence, boreal owl calls, then 3 barred owl calls, each followed by 2 minutes of silence each. So it's quite a long call. The second one, the great gray owl survey, again, 2 minutes of silence, then the boreal owl call, and then the great gray owl call, and 60 seconds of silence, and then you're done. And those work very, very effectively in these areas. You'll notice I have a code there for barred owls that's different from the Atlas code. And I get confused by this all the time. So I wanted to mention it to you guys because I noticed that in the data entry system, it still uses that. So when you're entering your data, just remember that you might see that funny code at times, but you'll be able to figure out, there's no doubt. So what is different between these and Mike's Eastern Screech-owl ones? First is habitat. I won't go into the details, but the habitat is appropriate for the species you're targeting. And as I've shown you here, the length of the broadcast is also appropriate for the species you're targeting. You will notice though that the northern saw-whet owl call uses boreal owl to call and not northern saw-whet. That's common with in these programs because a northern saw-whet owl responds readily to the boreal owl call, and it allows you to catch any boreal owls that may just happen to be in the area. They're incredibly rare. They'll only be in the northern portion of that region, but it allows you to catch them if they are there. And the only other tip I really have before I turn it back over is make a point of playing the whole broadcast file from start to finish. It's got buzzes and tones in there, so you know that you start, you know that you finish. You don't have to track the minute by minute times. It's all set up for you. And then you keep it standard for the data analysis, and that just makes it easier for you and to ensure that everything works well together when we do the data analysis. And I'm happy to answer any questions on this, but Mike, I think that's about all I really have to share.
Great. Well, thanks, Kathy. I will just hand things back to Emily. I'll stop sharing my screen.
That's great. We have so many questions about owls, everybody. So no worries. I'm sure you'll all get to talk a lot more about this. Kevin and Mike, why don't you guys come back as well, just so that just so we know that you're there. Good to see you. And okay, we'll start kind of just from the top. Okay, one question, actually a couple questions touch on this, a little bit about just some of the other owls. Maybe Mike, you can answer this question. You know, when we're talking about some of the owl species not mentioned in specific specialized protocols, how will, how do you expect data will be, collected on those?
Yeah, well, I should say that we are in the process of devising a special protocol for long-eared owls, but it's going to be a summertime survey. The survey is based around recording or listening for birds, young birds that are freshly out of the nest. The young make a very distinctive call, and it's the easiest time of the year to catch long-eared owls. So we are coming up with a survey protocol for that, and that will be coming out in the coming months. So that's one taken care of. Yeah, and the others are really going to be taken care of to some extent by the 2-minute silent listening period. That's standard now for owl surveys, and Kathy will say how that's done right across Canada, the standard 2 minutes of silent listening. So for things like great horned owls don't respond very well to playback anyway. So everybody who's doing owl surveys on any species is in fact doing a long-eared great horned owl survey as they go. So that'll take care of those ones. And then you get things like short ears, which are, of course, they're sort of crepuscular and they're very hard to survey for in any sort of standard way. So for those, we really just encourage people to go out and do sort of standard atlasing, go out in search of that bird, visiting the right habitat, the right time of day. And the relative abundance will be assessed for that species just by the checklist, basically by the number of birds per amount of effort that have gone into the areas where it occurs. And so I'm just trying to think what other owls we have. So that's most of them anyway.
Yeah, that sounds good. Cool. I mean, barn, but yeah, who would be lucky enough to get one of those? There won't be very many of them. So great. Okay. Yeah, this kind of ties into the last question a little bit too, Mike. We have a question about, is there a simpler way? So if somebody, he says this, is there a simpler way to input a one-off casual observation of an owl into the atlas without going through the rigmarole of the, established protocol? So if you do happen to observe an owl, you're not doing an owl survey, what do we do with that data? And maybe Kathy, you can handle that for other, I don't know, whoever wants to take it.
Yeah, well, I will just say that you're very much encouraged to do that, to go out and do your own owl surveys at night that don't follow this protocol. That will give us those dots on the map to show us the range of the bird. So very much encourage everybody to go out and do some owling. You can do some some playback and try and find the owls on your own, but obviously gotta be careful about playback and not overuse it, but still, it's just like, essentially, it's like other atlasing. You can go out and do a checklist and record the owls that you get. That information will go into the system. I can tell you that square that of mine, somebody's already reported screech owls and great horned owls, and it wasn't me. So people have obviously twigged to this, and of course that's what it's all about, just getting the best information we can on the occurrences of the bird. So if you come across one, you've got one at the cottage, whatever it is, you can get that information into the system. It could either be, you can just put it as an incidental record. If you're just sitting on the veranda at night and you hear a great horned owl calling, you could just put that in as an incidental record. Or if you're out looking for owls spending time, then you would actually put in a checklist that indicates how much effort you spent looking for them.
Sounds good. Kathy, did you have something to add to that about?
I do. I'm just, from experience with the owl survey, I suggest that people be very careful with the use of broadcast. You have, 40 points there that potentially are good habitat for your species. I can just picture that 10 people going to the same 40 points and maybe 2 people ending up on different sides of the same woodlot, and you're going to get wonderful owl responses that way because you're hearing the others broadcast. So it's just a case, be a little bit careful, talk to your RC and make sure nobody else is doing it if you go into the standard points.
Okay, great point, Kathy. And it leads into the next question that I got, which was, this is great. They're all flowing together. I love it. Which was just about how people, can maybe check in with their RCs to see which areas, squares, locations, or maybe they don't have to check in with their RCs to get this information, where owls have already been recorded so that they know that they're not kind of double checking and using playback in areas that have already been surveyed where there have already been positive detections.
It's going to be hard to get information as to precise locations where people have been looking for owls, but you can see which squares people have reported owls. But really the best thing would be to, certainly for these standard surveys, is to check with the coordinator and make sure that that is all coordinated. We are hoping to build into the coverage map that you see on the website an indication of which squares have had the standard owl survey done in them. Make sure that we can get, it may not happen this year, but at least sometime down the road, we'll have that on there so you can see that.
Yeah, we do have 5 years to do these. I guess that's a pretty good reminder of that as well.
Yeah.
And probably less of an issue for hawk owl surveys, right, Kevin? Because you're not expecting multiple atlasers in the same locations up there.
Right.
Yeah, probably not.
So, okay. This is a good question for Kevin, actually. So Angie Williams says that because they don't have the point count locations for Northern Ontario yet, what are you advising about the hawk owl surveys, and when should people do them, and should they start now in a different way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think those count locations should be showing up fairly soon. Mike, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're in the works and should be ready fairly soon. My advice, I guess, if you're really chomping at the bit to get out there and do a hawk owl survey, would be to go to appropriate habitat, keep good information about where you are. You can go through the protocol, but you'd have to keep it as an incidental record. It couldn't be part of the sort of formal formal surveys. But I encourage you, if you've got a good place to go and you're keen to go, don't let the lack of point count locations hold you back.
And to that point, this is actually a follow-up question for me. If people do go out and they kind of survey on their own and they identify some locations for hawk owls before the point counts are done, do you then encourage them to go back and do a formal survey afterwards? Should they do both, or should they just stick to one or the other?
Well, it's kind of a little different in that, if you find a location that's got a hawk owl, there's probably a slim chance that it's going to actually be a designated point count location. So you could go for it. I mean, you could try the protocol there and see if it works. But my guess is the actual sites where the point counts are going to be defined in an atlas square may not be the ones that you've found a bird on already. And that's probably the same for any species anywhere in the province. So.
Good point. Okay, thanks. I have a couple of interesting questions from Marshall Bile. I guess probably a repeat atlaser, because he asks, is the recording the same for Atlas 2, and is the protocol being replicated? Not for hawk owl, obviously, because it's new, but Mike?
Yes, yes, it's the same recording as we use in Atlas too. When we wanted that, right? Because we wanted to make sure, keep things as consistent as possible between the projects. I think we cleaned it up a little bit and the beats are a little clearer and that kind of thing than they were last time, but the same recording.
That sounds good. Not enough to throw off the data. And kind of to that point of just kind of the calls and the playbacks, is there a noise? Michelle asked, is there a noise range in terms of decibels? Like how loud you need to play these? And is there a way to make sure that you're playing these calls loud enough? Kathy, I mean, maybe you can speak to that, and Mike too. Kathy, why don't you start? Because I know you probably deal with these questions.
The best thing to do is to test your unit with the softest sound for that protocol. So for like Northern and Central, you'd use the Boreal Owl and see how far it will carry. And we want to have ideally about 500 meters. For marsh monitoring, we've always suggested 50 watts, and that's a lot of power. So, and that's hard to find out as well, unless you really understand how to do decibel readings and scream apps and all that stuff. So the easiest way is just to take a friend, park the car, have them go up 250 meters, play this call. If they wave at you, hey, I can hear it. You go like this, and then they go up to another 250 meters, play the call again, and do that to see how far you can hear it. That is the simplest way of making sure you've got the volume you need.
Yeah, and you're making sure that a person can hear it, but I'm sure maybe an owl could probably hear a call that a person couldn't too. So if you can hear it, I think, is it safe to say an owl definitely could?
I think so, and it gives you a standard, right? It gives us an idea of how far it's carrying, and that's what we need to know to compare the numbers.
Sounds good. Mike, did you have anything to add to that, or did Kathy pretty much cover it?
Yeah, Kathy pretty much covered it. I would say for the Screech-owl, you probably don't need quite as much volume as you need in the north for those other ones, but it would be good if you could hear it at least 250 meters away. The Screech-owls are mostly going to be within 100 meters anyway, and you might stimulate them to call at 500 meters, but you're not going to hear it anyway because it doesn't carry that far when they're calling.
Oh, they're very quiet little birds for sure.
I was just going to add one more thing, if I might too, that it's good to be careful when you're testing your playback equipment to not put the volume higher than the capacity of the speaker to play, because once you get distortion, it's gonna ruin any chance of having birds respond, because they'll be able to tell right away that there's something really wrong with the sound coming out of that speaker. So just watch for distortion as well.
That's a really good point. And with certain speakers, it happens at a fairly low volume level. So that's a great point, Kevin.
Emily, there's just one thing I haven't mentioned, that we did purchase a bunch of devices that are good for broadcast. So they work with your phone, they're Bluetooth enabled. And so we provided those out to the regional coordinators. They only have one or two each, but a lot of people have their own equipment anyway. But if you don't and you need to borrow the equipment, contact your coordinator and they'll help you out with that.
That is a great point. I know we got some delivered to our house and we want them out of there. So we hope people ask for them. That's great. Okay, I think we're going to take a quick segue from owls very briefly, just to talk about some general Atlassian questions that we've gotten. And maybe Mike Burrell wants to come back on for one of these because they're app related. Through all channels, through Discord and all sorts of others, we've been having people ask, just mention that their app isn't working or that they've had to reboot. And so, Mike, do you want to talk about the app update?
Yeah, sure. So there was an app update this week or in the past week, and it seems like it was a really big update. So it's caused a bunch of issues for people that were running the app already. If you're encountering any issues, the best thing we can suggest is to reboot or reinstall the app. So uninstall it and then reinstall it. That seems to be working for most people. Before you uninstall, if you do have any saved draft checklists, those are going to get lost when you uninstall. So get out your old notebook and write down your notes, or else transcribe them straight into Nature Counts through the website. And try the reinstall. If it's still not working, then please pass on any feedback you've got, what the issues are, and ideally as much detail as possible so we can try to recreate the issues. If we can't, then we can't fix it. So send those off to the Atlas office. And just more generally, the app is still going through a lot of updates, and it's nowhere near where it's going to be, hopefully within a month or two. So please be patient. And if you're not a patient person when it comes to technology, then I would recommend using the website for your data entry until the app gets a little further along in its development. And you can also use eBird to collect the data and then import those straight into the website. So there's lots of options out there.
Sounds good. Yeah, and the app is improving all the time, but yeah, it's not quite there yet. So I know that some people are having fun just kind of like seeing how the changes that have been happening over time. Thanks, Mike. Lots of questions answered right there. Okay, here's one more about Screech-owl surveys. So someone wanted to know, do you do just one Screech-owl survey per square over the 5 years, or is it something that you recommend doing annually?
Once is all it takes. Yeah. So, and partly because it's a broadcast survey, we don't want to be bugging the birds on an annual basis. So once you've done the survey, it's done, and no one ever needs to go and do Screech-owl surveys till next Atlas in that square.
Okay, that's good to know. A couple of people liked that question, so I think it answered something for a lot of people. Another person said, this is an interesting question from Scott. He said, you mentioned using the lowest numbered 10 stations with suitable habitat. If you are aware of owls that are actually close to a higher numbered point survey location, can you cherry pick those sites, or do you just choose the first 10 sites with suitable habitat? And if this differs between the protocols after Mike's answered, Kathy and Kevin, please do chime in after, but we'll start with Mike.
Well, I'll answer for everybody and say,
okay.
No cherry picking, none whatsoever. Really, just stick with the protocol, please. That way we get an unbiased sample of the birds in the square.
And Kevin already mentioned all sorts of other ways to sample for owls outside of the protocol already. So there are other options for logging those owls. So that's a good point too.
Yeah, certainly. If you do the survey and you don't get any, but there are owls in there, by all means, go out and make sure you get an owl in that square.
Sounds good.
Just don't record it on your standard owl survey.
Okay, good to know that there were actually 2 questions that were exactly the same, which is great. Okay, this is more of like a technical aspect question. Someone was curious about getting point count locations and what they call normal lat longs. They may mean decimal degrees, I'm not sure. They say that the current way of doing it isn't compatible with their GPS. Does anyone want to talk about how to translate lat longs into different formats?
I can try.
Okay.
So there are a number of options on the Square resources page. Different formats you can get your coordinates in. So the one option there is, I think you can get them in GPX format. Let me just zoom in here. I'm playing with it as we speak. Yeah, you can get it in GPX format. That's one of the options. And most GPS units, the software that comes with them will read GPX format into your GPS unit. And so if you're reading them into your GPS unit into that software, that should let you convert it right within that software. I think we have some tutorials planned for that stuff. Maybe some videos that will be coming out at some point soon. Mike, maybe I'm the one that's supposed to do those.
Good plan, Mike. We should do those if we haven't got them on the current agenda.
There is a video that should be out imminently that shows you how to download those your point count locations in your square boundary and make a Google map. And then you can load that on your phone if you've got a mobile device. So we've got some resources coming your way.
Yeah, and you can put decimal degrees lat longs into your phone as well if you don't have a GPS unit. There's lots of options. And yeah, we should make some videos about that. That's a great idea. Let's do that. Okay, so I've answered that one. Let's do one from Facebook. There's like, 50 people languishing on Facebook, and we want to answer their questions as well. Somebody was curious to know, it's interesting because they want to know about long-eared owls, and we haven't talked about protocols for them. They're curious in general. What's good long-eared habitat in Southern Ontario? What does that look like? Anybody want to take that one on?
Well, I can jump in, and
Go for it.
yeah, typically from my knowledge of them, it's basically coniferous habitat that's the key thing. I know Mike's brother Ken went out and did surveys around Conestoga Lake, which is all conifer plantation, and did very well in terms of long-eared owls up there. I think boggy habitats are good. It's usually dense conifers. My experience tends to be they tend to be more in the sprucey habitat than in the piney habitats. Really thick stuff they tend to like. Had them in cedar lowlands on a few occasions. I don't know. Mike, Kevin, you had similar experiences?
Yeah, I was just going to add that that's where the nests are going to be, but usually they're in, if you can find that habitat that Mike's talking about, right next to like a marsh or a weedy field or an overgrown field, somewhere where they can go and hunt. They'll hunt in those open areas. So not, ideally not next to like soybean fields. So you got to get that combination. And in Southern Ontario, where there's so few woodlots, it's almost easier than once you're up on like the Shield, where you can zone in more on those conifer plantations for the nest sites.
Kevin, I know you were typing something with somebody, but did you have anything to add to that, or you good?
No, I'm pretty much consistent with the other two answers. I've just been trying to answer some of the questions on the Q&A there, so.
Which is great, because I mean, we've got 7 minutes left, so we probably won't get to them all. I'm trying to get as many as are kind of representative of all the questions asked here. I've got one here that's actually been voted up by somebody, so we'll ask that. It's by Barbara O'Neill. She says if she, hears a bird calling, I guess owl or no, but it's not within the safe date yet, what code do you use on your Atlas app? I'm going to give that one to Mike Cadman.
Okay, well, I was going to bounce that to Mike Burrell. He loves those kind of questions.
All right, Mike Burrell, you're up, I guess.
Mike, you okay? That?
Yeah, and this is another one. We've got a video in the works to sort of talk through these scenarios. So the safe dates, the breeding season dates. So first of all, we do have an update to those and an update to that appendix that it should be up on the website pretty soon, hopefully. So it does deal with sort of some of these scenarios, but we've got a video in the works that should help explain it, but you probably don't want to wait till that's out. So, I mean, the important thing with the safe dates and the breeding dates, those are meant to be guidelines. And it really, the whole point of the safe dates is because we don't want you to be recording birds with breeding evidence if they're just migrants passing through. So, if it's something like woodcocks and it's at a place where woodcocks breed every year and they're doing their display flights now nightly, I would go ahead and record it. If you're not sure that it is an actual breeding site, then I would leave the breeding evidence off for now, and come back in another week. If they're still there, then that increases the confidence that they are actually nesting in that location.
Good. You can put a T then there. Okay, we'll do a couple more, and we'll do the owl ones before we do any others, because it is kind of the theme of the evening, right? One person wanted to know about the Screech-owl surveys, just about the right, the appropriate habitat. They ask, are both deciduous and coniferous treat areas considered suitable habitat? Is there kind of a minimum percent forest cover that's required?
Typically, I don't know of screech owls nesting in like a pure conifer habitat. Others may know different, but a mixed conifer deciduous woodland or lowland areas, swamps and such, basically they like to have, they got a big enough hole to nest in. So large trees, large bole trees in those kind of circumstances.
That sounds good. Thank you. Okay, we have one for Kathy here that she wants to answer live. Thanks, Kathy, for marking that. I really appreciate it. Okay, somebody asks, 12 Mile Bay looks to be a little bit north of the Screech-owl survey range. Should we try to extend that range or focus on the barred owl survey up there? Kathy?
It all depends on the habitat in the area. I would start by looking at the barred owl and see if you have the habitat for that. And then consider whether you have enough points out of the 40 that are appropriate habitat for the screech owl, and if you've heard screech owls in the area. So there's no reason why you can't do both, but try to focus your efforts on the survey that works the best for the conditions there. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that sounds good. Certainly, we would encourage people to do things outside of that expected range. We wouldn't expect much in the way of success. The line that we show across central Ontario there for the north end of the screech owl survey is based on previous records, basically largely up to the end of last atlas. There quite possibly a lot of species have been edging further north, so they may be a little further north. So there's no reason to not do them further north if people are interested in doing that. It would be helpful to us. And
remember, we have 5 years. So what we find out this year doesn't get done, we can work on next year. We also have the Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey, which will cover a fair bit of that massive area of data collection for if we don't get atlasers out to it. So there's options out there.
That's good. And the owl surveys are very complementary to the atlas. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that really we're just sort of letting everybody go and let people fill in as many squares as you can early, and then we'll in later years we'll be targeting more. Where are the gaps in coverage, and we'll be highlighting those and trying to encourage people to help out in those areas.
Thanks. Okay, so there are obviously there's a few other questions here. We've tried to answer all of the owl specific questions. Keep in mind that there are ways though if you have like a general atlas in question and you're curious about protocols and general questions, we have put, if you are in the Zoom, we've put the email address of the atlas in the general chat, so you can certainly inquire in a different way. And you can also, reach the atlas in other ways. So I just wanted to mention that before we sign off, and I let everybody who's on the panel tonight kind of end with their final thoughts and announcements that they might want you to know. Yeah, you can get the Ontario Bird Atlas on Instagram on Bird Atlas, all one word. It's the same for Twitter. You can find a recording of this video on Facebook Live, especially if you're watching it there, it's already there, but also on our on the Atlas YouTube channel, if you aren't a Facebook person, which is great. And the YouTube channel is called Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas -3. Why don't we just kind of go through? Mike, Cadman, do you have any kind of final announcements or anything you want to say before we leave?
Well, I was just going to mention Mike Burrell brought it up in the discussion about the discussion board. We are developing a site where you're going to be able to go in and look up answers to these kind of questions and answer other people's questions, so we can get that discussion going. It's very near to ready, so we're hoping we'll have that up in the very near future.
Might not need Sappy hours anymore.
Well, yeah. Otherwise, no, just thanks to everybody for tuning in and for all the great questions, and best of luck with those owl surveys. I hope you really enjoy it and find lots of owls.
Me too. Kathy, any parting words for owl surveyors?
Yes. Just be judicious with your use of the broadcast file. Remember that they're there for a purpose, and we are lucky to have them, but there's a lot of us. So use them carefully, use them when you need them, and then stop using them when you hear the owls. If you're not doing a survey, stop playing them. And by being careful with their use, we'll keep that tool and we'll be able to use it safely.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kathy. Kevin, anything about hawk owl surveys you want us to know, or anything else actually?
Yeah, I'll maybe mention one thing about hawk owl surveys before we take off. Because it's a new survey, I mean, we've tried to test it out as much as we can to make sure it's relatively foolproof and there's no issues with it. But the only way to know on a larger scale is to get people out there and trying it out. So I'd love to hear that you tried it and found a minor problem that we can tweak, and please let me know. That would be great.
Well, work in progress. And
Yeah.
Mike Burrell, you get to end us off, I guess, for tonight. Have you got anything?
No, thanks for joining. I'm gonna go listen for some woodcocks.
Sounds good. He still has some time. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. Catch the recording. I know you'll want to look at this amazing evening over and over again. And otherwise, we will catch you at the next one. Thanks so much. See ya.
Bye all.